At the top of a skyscraper, a cold executive believed he had absolute control over his life and over his feelings. But everything changes when a little girl in a yellow dress breaks into his routine with an envelope marked urgent and personal. Inside the envelope, a revelation that tears his past apart and changes the course of his future forever. In that moment, he discovers that the love he had avoided for years had eyes, a name, and was 5 years old. On a sunny Monday in March, the London sky awoke to the characteristic sounds of a metropolis in motion. Impatient horns cut through the air, hurried footsteps marked uneven rhythms on the pavements, and voices mingled to form a chaotic symphony that spread through the skyscrapers of Whitehall. On the 42nd floor of the Seal Tower, one of the most imposing buildings in the city centre, Henry Ashton observed everything with distant eyes, as if contemplating a giant aquarium of which he was not a part. At 38, Henry was the epitome of corporate success. Son of a traditional family of Yorkshire bankers, he had transformed the small tech company he bought 10 years ago into the country's largest financial software developer. His well-defined features, square jaw and grey-green eyes perfectly matched the custom-made Italian suit he wore. Every detail of his appearance was calculated, just like every decision he made at the helm of Ashton Tech. "Mr. Ashton, the quarterly reports are ready for your review," announced Marianne, his efficient executive assistant, interrupting his thoughts. "Leave them on the table. I'll review them before the board meeting," he replied, without taking his eyes off the window. His voice sounded like thin ice cracking over metal. Henry conducted his business with the precision of a maestro, leaving no room for errors or sentimentality. For him, every relationship was a transaction. Every gesture hid an interest. He had learned early on that trust was a dangerous luxury in the business world, and this philosophy had spilled over into his personal life, erecting invisible walls around him. His penthouse apartment in Kensington was decorated with valuable works of art he never admired. He owned a cellar with rare wines he rarely tasted. Everything in his life was to impress, to create the perfect image, to maintain control. His relationship with Tiana Maxwell, the company's marketing director and a well-known London socialite, followed the same logic. A strategic partnership, convenient for both, without great emotional depth. "Mr. Ashton," Marianne's voice sounded again through the intercom. There was something different in her tone, an unusual hesitation. "There's an unusual situation at reception." "Be more specific, Marianne," he replied impatiently. "A child, sir. A girl of approximately 5 years old is at reception. She insists on delivering something personally to the most important man in this building." Those were her words. Henry frowned. "And why am I being informed of this? Don't we have protocols for these situations?" "Yes, sir, but—" Marianne paused. "Mrs. Zelda, the receptionist, said there's something different about this child. She has an envelope that says, 'Urgent and Personal.' Mrs. Zelda has been with us for 20 years and has never broken protocols before. She thought you should know." Henry consulted his wristwatch, a Patek Philippe, that cost more than many of his employees' annual salaries. "I have a video conference with German investors in 15 minutes. "I understand, sir. I'll ask them to direct her to social services and—" "Wait," he interrupted, surprised by his own words. "Give me 5 minutes. Bring the child up here." While waiting, Henry tried to understand the impulse that had made him change his mind. Perhaps it was just curiosity. Perhaps the boredom of predictable routines. Either way, it would just be a brief interruption before he resumed control of his meticulously planned day. The door opened, and Marianne entered, accompanied by a small figure. A girl with curly brown hair, held back by colourful clips, wearing a simple but clean and well-pressed yellow dress. In her small hands she held a slightly crumpled envelope. Her eyes, a deep brown, held a seriousness that contrasted with her tender age. "Sir, this is—" Marianne began, but was interrupted by the child's decisive voice. "My name is Julia," the girl said, taking a step forward. "Could you please wait outside? I need to speak to him alone." Marianne looked at Henry, who nodded slightly, intrigued by the child's composure. When they were alone, Julia walked to the imposing mahogany desk and extended the envelope. "This is for you. It's my mummy's last wish." Henry accepted the envelope with hesitation, noticing urgent and personal written in a handwriting that seemed strangely familiar. As he opened it, he felt as if the ground beneath his feet disappeared. The letter was from Louisa Caldwell, a woman he had loved deeply 6 years ago, and who had vanished from his life without explanation. "Dearest Henry," the letter began in the same delicate handwriting he would recognize anywhere. "If this letter has reached your hands, it means you have found our daughter, Julia. Yes, our daughter. I know you must be confused and perhaps even angry that I kept this secret for so long." Henry's eyes jumped from one line to another, absorbing information that shook the foundations of his carefully constructed reality. Louisa was suffering from a serious, advanced stage illness. She had hidden the pregnancy when they separated, determined not to interfere with his promising career, believing she was doing what was best for everyone. Now, faced with the possibility of no longer being able to care for Julia, she had decided to reveal the truth. "Look at her," the letter continued, "and you will see your eyes, your smile, your determination. I ask for nothing more than what you wish to give. But she deserves to know her father, and you deserve to know you have a wonderful daughter." Henry looked up from the letter and truly looked at the girl. Julia watched him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. For the first time, he noticed the similarities: the shape of her chin, the way she slightly tilted her head when assessing something, the way her lips pressed into a thin line when she was serious. You know what this letter says?" he asked, his voice losing its usual firmness. Julia nodded affirmatively. "Mummy explained that you're my daddy, but you didn't know about me. She said you're very busy and important, and maybe you couldn't see me much, but I should still give you the letter." Henry felt something break inside him, like a dam finally giving way under excessive pressure. Memories of Louisa flooded his mind. Her crystalline laughter, the passion they shared, the plans they had made, and then the anonymous photograph he had received of her embracing another man. The pain of betrayal, the decision to cut ties completely, the wounded pride that had prevented him from seeking explanations. "Where is your mummy now, Julia?" he managed to ask, his throat suddenly dry. "At St. Jude's Hospital. She's been very tired lately." The girl answered with a naturalness that only made the situation more painful. "Aunt Constance is with me. She brought me here. She's waiting downstairs." The intercom rang, reminding Henry of the video conference about to begin. His mind, normally quick for complex business decisions, seemed paralyzed before this child who could be his daughter. "Julia, he began, unsure what to say. "I need some time to understand all this. Can you wait outside with my assistant for a few minutes?" The girl nodded with disconcerting maturity. Before leaving, however, she turned and said, "Mummy said you might be angry with her, not with me. She said she did what she thought was best, but she also said you were always fair." When the door closed, Henry sank into his chair, looking at the letter in his hands and at the window that showed a city that now seemed strangely different. In less than 10 minutes, the orderly world he had built was crumbling, and at the center of this chaos was a girl in a yellow dress with his own eyes. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. Henry cancelled the video conference. For the first time in his career, he postponed an appointment without elaborate explanations, merely stating that an urgent family matter required his immediate attention. After almost 20 minutes alone in his office, composing himself and rereading Louisa's letter, he called Marianne back. "Please contact Dr. Paul Rivers. Tell him I need a DNA test with utmost urgency and absolute discretion. I also want information about St. Jude's Hospital, specifically about a patient named Louisa Caldwell." Marianne nodded without asking questions. Years of working with Henry had taught her when not to inquire. "And the girl, sir?" "Ask the receptionist to bring the person responsible for her up here. And Marianne, cancel my appointments for the rest of the day." Half an hour later, Constance Farrell, a woman in her 60s with grey hair and a tired expression, sat before him. Julia had stayed at reception with Mrs. Zelda, who seemed charmed by the little visitor. "I'm Louisa's neighbour," Constance explained. "I look after Julia when Louisa is undergoing treatment. I was a nurse for 40 years, so I understand her situation better than most." "What situation exactly?" Henry asked, trying to maintain a professional tone, as if conducting one of the many negotiation meetings that dominated his routine. Constance assessed him for a moment before replying, as if deciding how much he deserved to know. Leukemia. Diagnosed 2 years ago. She fought bravely, but in recent weeks there's been a significant worsening. The woman paused. Louisa never wanted to look for you. She was stubborn until the end. But when the doctor suggested she organize her pending affairs, she finally gave in. For Julia, not for herself. She never told me about the pregnancy, Henry said, more to himself than to Constance. She didn't tell you because you disappeared first, the woman replied with sharp frankness. One day you were there, the next you were gone. Louisa found out about the pregnancy a week after you cut contact. She tried to call, but your numbers had changed. She went to your old apartment, but you had moved. She sent emails that were never answered. Henry felt a knot forming in his throat. I received a photograph, he said. Louisa with another man. It looked intimate. Constance frowned. The only man in Louisa's life besides you in recent years was her brother, Maurice. He returned from Ireland for a while, about 6 years ago. Perhaps that's the photo you mention. The revelation hit Henry like a punch to the stomach. Maurice, Louisa's brother, whom he had never met, who lived in Portugal, the anonymous photo, without context, without explanation, and his impulsive reaction, driven by wounded pride, cutting all ties without allowing for clarification. I need to see her, Henry decided, standing up. Now, at St. Jude's Hospital, located in a quiet neighbourhood in the West End of London, Henry felt strangely out of place. The aseptic corridors, the smell of disinfectant, the people in white coats moving with purpose. It was a world completely different from the meeting rooms and glass-walled offices that constituted his natural habitat. At reception, his presence caused a discreet stir. Henry Ashton was not just a successful businessman, he was a well-known figure in the national economic scene, frequently interviewed on business programs and featured on the covers of specialized magazines. I'm here to see Louisa Caldwell, he announced, ignoring the stares and whispers. He was directed to room 317 in the oncology department. Before entering, however, he was intercepted by Dr. Andrew Miller, the doctor responsible for the case. Mr. Ashton, we weren't expecting your visit, said the doctor, a middle-aged man with deep circles under his eyes and a compassionate gaze. Ms. Caldwell is stable but fragile. I ask that your visit be brief. Does she know I'm here? Not yet. I thought it prudent to speak with you first. Ms. Caldwell is going through a delicate time. Intense surprises may not be advisable. Henry nodded, feeling suddenly insecure, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Can you tell her then? If she doesn't want to see me, I'll respect her decision. The doctor entered the room, leaving Henry in the corridor with his turbulent thoughts. Minutes later, he returned with a slight affirmative nod. Upon entering the room, Henry needed a few seconds to adjust his gaze. The woman in the hospital bed seemed simultaneously familiar and strange. Louisa's face, once full of life and color, was pale and thinner. Her brown hair, which he remembered falling in waves over her shoulders, was short, almost shaved. But her eyes, those deep brown eyes that Julia had inherited, still shone with the same intensity that had captivated him years ago. "Henry," she said, her voice weaker than he remembered, but still melodious. "You came." He approached the bed, unsure how to act, what to say. All the phrases mentally rehearsed during the journey to the hospital seemed inadequate now. "Julia gave me your letter," he finally managed to say. A faint smile appeared on Louisa's dry lips. "She's determined, isn't she? Just like you." The silence that followed was laden with unspoken words, unasked questions, lost years. Henry pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "Why did you never tell me?" he finally asked. Louisa closed her eyes for a moment. "At first I tried, but you had completely disappeared. Then it became increasingly difficult. You were building your career, appearing in the news frequently. You seemed to be moving on, and I didn't want to be an obstacle." "An obstacle, Louisa? You were pregnant with my daughter. And you had left me without a word, Henry," she replied, a slight hint of bitterness in her voice. "What was I supposed to think? That you would be happy with the news, that you would abandon your plans to start a family with me?" Henry ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomposure. "I received a photo of you with another man. I thought you were cheating on me." Louisa frowned, confused. "A photo? With whom?" "Constance mentioned it might be your brother, Maurice." Recognition dawned in Louisa's eyes. It must have been the day he arrived from Ireland. We were celebrating at Luciano's restaurant, but who would send something like that to you? Henry shook his head, the same question tormenting him now. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I should have asked for explanations. I should have talked to you, but instead I simply walked away. We both made mistakes, Louisa said softly. I also could have insisted more. I could have looked for someone in your circle. Perhaps we were ready for this now, not before. Silence returned, more comfortable this time. Henry observed the monitors beside the bed, the medications hanging from the IV pole, the small calendar on the opposite wall, marked with dates for exams and procedures. How is the treatment going? He finally asked. Louisa shrugged, a gesture that seemed to cost her some effort. Good days, bad days. More bad than good lately. The doctors still have hope. But she let the sentence die in the air. I'm transferring you to the best specialized clinic in the country, Henry declared with the same conviction he used to announce business decisions. I'll hire the best specialists, seek experimental treatments if necessary. Henry? No, Louisa, this is not negotiable. I've already lost 6 years. I won't lose any more time. A tear rolled down Louisa's face. And Julia? She'll stay with you, of course. But I want to get to know her better, if you'll allow it. I want to be a part of her life somehow. She'll like that, Louisa replied with a weak smile. She asks about you. I showed her photos, told her stories. You're almost a superhero to her. I have a lot to make up for, Henry said, his voice breaking slightly. A nurse entered the room, discreetly indicating that visiting time was ending. Henry stood up, reluctant to leave, as if afraid that everything would disappear again if he walked out the door. I'll be back tomorrow, he promised, and I'll bring news about the transfer to the other clinic. Louisa nodded, visibly tired. Before Henry reached the door, she called his name one last time. Henry, thank you for coming, for not being angry. He looked at the woman he had once loved intensely and realized that something of that feeling still lived within him, preserved like an insect in amber, intact despite the years. I could never stay angry with you for long, Louisa, he admitted. That was the problem. Leaving the hospital, Henry felt the weight of the day on his shoulders. He got into his car, a latest model Mercedes-Benz, and sat for long minutes before starting the engine. His phone rang insistently. Tiana probably questioning his sudden disappearance. But for the first time in years, business, appointments and expectations seemed to belong to another life, a life that suddenly felt empty and purposeless. Driving through the streets of London, with the sun beginning to set behind the Shard, Henry made a decision. He wouldn't return to his Kensington apartment that night. Instead, he went to a small hotel in the city centre where no one would recognize him. He needed to think, plan, reorganize. In less than 24 hours, his life had been completely transformed, and something within him, something that had been dormant for a long time, was beginning to awaken. The next morning, Henry woke with a start in a hotel room that didn't match his usual standards. Ordinary cotton sheets instead of Egyptian, simple furniture instead of exclusive design, a view of old buildings in central London instead of the Kensington sea view. For a moment, he felt disoriented, until the memories of the previous day flooded him like a wave. Louisa, hospital, Julia, his daughter. He checked his phone, 27 missed calls, most from Tiana, some from company executives, several emails marked as urgent. A message from Marianne informing him that Dr. Paul Rivers was awaiting instructions regarding the DNA test. He sat on the bed, running his hands over his face. He needed to make decisions, set priorities, regain control. His natural instinct would be to go back to the office, reorganize his schedule, delegate responsibilities, and then deal with the personal situation during carefully scheduled breaks. That's how it had always worked. But something had changed within him. The sight of Louisa in that hospital bed, fragile but still determined, the letter written in the same delicate handwriting he had kept in old letters, Julia's face with undeniably similar features to his own, all of this had created fissures in his carefully constructed defenses. He made a decision that would surprise anyone who knew him. He called Tiana. "Where are you?" was her first question, her voice oscillating between concern and irritation. "You just disappeared yesterday. Cancelled the video conference with the Germans. Didn't show up for dinner with the investors. Aren't answering my calls." Tiana, he interrupted, with a firmness that allowed no retort. I'm going through an unexpected family situation that requires my full attention right now. Family situation? What family situation? Your mother is in Manchester, your father. She hesitated, knowing that Henry's relationship with his father, the patriarch of the Ashton family, was delicate territory. Well, you hardly speak to him. It's a personal matter I prefer not to discuss over the phone. I will be absent for a few days. As marketing director and a board member, I ask you to temporarily assume some of my executive functions. The silence on the other end of the line indicated surprise. Henry Ashton never delegated control, even temporarily. Are you all right? Tiana asked, her tone shifting to genuine concern. I am, he replied, realizing that despite everything, it was true. Just dealing with something important. We'll talk when I get back. After hanging up, he made 2 more calls, one to Marianne, instructing her to reorganize his schedule for the next few days, and another to Dr. Paul Rivers, scheduling the DNA test for that same afternoon. Then something even more unusual by his standards. He drove personally to Constance's modest apartment in Islington, without a chauffeur, without assistance, just him in his Mercedes, out of place on those narrow, tree-lined streets of middle-class London. Constance answered the door with an expression that mixed surprise and a slight displeasure. Behind her, Julia played with colourful blocks in the small living room, decorated with antique furniture and well-tended plants. Mr. Ashton, the woman said, without moving to allow him entry. I wasn't expecting to see you so soon. I'd like to speak with Julia, if possible, Henry replied, feeling strangely nervous, like a teenager on his first date. Constance assessed him for a long moment. She's just had breakfast. She's playing a bit before we go visit Louisa at the hospital. I could accompany you if it's not inconvenient. Constance's resistance was palpable, but Julia's childish voice interrupted the tense moment. Aunt Connie, who's there? She asked, approaching the door. Seeing Henry, her eyes lit up with a recognition that made his heart ache. Hello? You're the important man from the big building. Despite the situation, Henry couldn't help but smile. My name is Henry. I know, Julia replied with the direct honesty of children. You're my daddy. Mummy told me. Constance sighed, finally stepping aside. Come in then. But I warn you now, if you make this girl suffer, you'll have to deal with me. And believe me, being a big businessman won't help you in that case. Henry nodded, acknowledging the seriousness of the warning. He sat on the simple sofa in the living room, watching Julia return to her blocks. The girl was building something that looked like a simplified version of a building. It's the company where you work, she explained, noticing his gaze. Aunt Connie showed me a photo in a magazine. It's very tall. It is, Henry agreed, moving to sit on the floor beside her, completely ignoring the fact that he was wearing a suit that cost more than all the furniture in that room combined. But something important is missing. What? Julia asked, curious. A helipad. Do you know what that is? It's like a small airport on top of the building for helicopters. Julia's eyes widened. You have a helicopter. The company does, he replied, picking up a red block and placing it on top of the structure. Sometimes I use it to avoid traffic. The conversation flowed with surprising naturalness. Julia asked about everything. What it was like to work in such a tall place if he knew other countries, why he wore a tie every day. And Henry answered patiently, discovering in himself a capacity for childish communication he had never suspected he possessed. When it was time to visit Louisa at the hospital, Henry offered his car, but Constance was firm. They would go by bus, as always. Julia needs normalcy, Mr. Ashton. Your world of luxury cars and helicopters is fascinating, but it's not real for her. At St. Jude's Hospital, Louisa seemed a little more willing than the day before. A slight blush colored her cheeks, and she was sitting in an armchair beside the bed instead of lying down. Look who came, Mummy, Julia announced, running to hug her carefully, as if she had been instructed on how to proceed. Daddy showed me how to make a helipad. Louisa looked at Henry, surprised and moved to hear the word daddy coming so naturally from her daughter's lips. Helipad, she gently corrected. Is that right? And what else did you talk about? As Julia animatedly recounted her morning, Henry watched mother and daughter with a mixture of admiration and regret. There was so much lost time, so many moments he would never recover. First steps, First words, birthdays. Constance suggested taking Julia for a juice at the hospital cafeteria, giving the adults a moment alone. When they left, a comfortable silence hung in the room. "She seems to like you," Louisa finally commented. "She's incredible," Henry replied sincerely. "Intelligent, curious. How did you manage, Louisa? To raise such a balanced child alone, especially with—" He hesitated, looking at the medical equipment around them. "Not alone," she corrected. "I have wonderful friends. Constance is practically a grandmother to Julia, and my brother, when he's in the UK, is an extremely present uncle." Henry nodded, feeling an irrational pang of jealousy for the people who had shared what he had lost. "I spoke with the hospital administration," he informed, changing the subject. "You will be transferred to St. Vincent's Clinic in 2 days. It's the best for oncology treatments in the country." Louisa frowned slightly. "Henry, you didn't have to—" "Please," he interrupted, leaning forward in his chair. "Let me do this, not out of guilt or obligation, but because I want to, because you both deserve every possible chance." After a moment of hesitation, Louisa nodded. "Thank you. Also—" Henry cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. "I also scheduled a DNA test for this afternoon. It's just a formality. Julia has my eyes, my chin, even the same way of tilting her head when she's concentrating. But I thought it prudent for future legal matters." "I understand," Louisa replied, her gaze distant for a moment. "You've always been careful with details. It's one of the things I admired about you." "Admired?" he asked, noticing the past tense. A faint smile touched Louisa's lips. "Still admire. Some things don't change, Henry." That afternoon, after leaving Louisa to rest and promising Julia he would return the next day, Henry drove to Dr. Paul Rivers' private laboratory in Chelsea. The procedure was quick and discreet as requested. Just a saliva sample and the guarantee of results in 48 hours, half the normal time, for a considerably higher price. Leaving the laboratory, Henry felt his phone vibrate. It was Tiana again. He ignored the call but realized he needed to address this issue soon. His relationship with Tiana had always been more a strategic alliance than a deep emotional connection. But still, there were expectations, tacit commitments. Instead of returning to the hotel where he was staying, Henry drove to Brighton Beach and parked facing the sea. He stayed there for hours, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, the waters of the Thames estuary reflecting the colors like a liquid mirror, the Shard gradually transforming into a silhouette against the horizon. His phone rang again, this time displaying his father's name, Augustus Ashton. The family patriarch rarely contacted him, preferring to communicate through lawyers and advisors. The fact that he was calling personally indicated that news of the situation had already reached his ears. "Father," Henry answered, his voice automatically adopting a more formal tone. "What's this story I'm hearing?" Augustus's voice was as sharp as ever. "You've disappeared from the office, cancelled important meetings, and now they tell me you're visiting public hospitals?" Henry took a deep breath, feeling the old family tension resurface. "I'm resolving a personal matter." "Nothing is just personal when your surname is Ashton," his father retorted. "Everything we do impacts the family business. I thought you, of all people, understood that." "I understand perfectly," Henry replied, surprising himself with the calm in his own voice. "And that's exactly why I need to resolve this matter properly. I have a daughter, father, a 5-year-old girl I never knew." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, Augustus spoke, his voice now cautious. "Are you sure about this? Enough to do a DNA test and assume my responsibilities while awaiting the result. It's with that girl, isn't it? The literature professor or something. The one who wasn't from a good family." Henry felt anger rising within him. "Louisa. Yes, she's her daughter. And she's sick. Very sick." "Convenient," Augustus commented with disdain, "to show up just now with a child when your assets are growing exponentially." "She didn't seek me out," Henry replied, striving to maintain his composure. "I found her by chance. She never asked for anything, father." Again, silence. Then, "Be cautious, Henry. Verify everything. And when you confirm paternity, contact our lawyers. We need to protect the family assets." The call ended before Henry could reply, leaving him with a bitter taste in his mouth. Of all possible reactions, this was the one he least expected. His father hadn't asked what his granddaughter was like, if she was well, if she needed anything. Only the assets mattered, as always. Looking at the now starry sky over the city, Henry made a silent promise. Julia would never feel as he had felt in childhood, an asset to be protected, a continuation of the lineage, an heir before being a child. Meanwhile, miles away, in the luxurious Kensington apartment she shared with Henry, Tiana Maxwell furiously navigated her laptop. After dozens of unanswered calls, ignored messages, and vague explanations from Marianne, she had decided to take matters into her own hands. She used her contacts and discovered that Henry had visited St. Jude's Hospital. A few searches later, she found the name of the patient he had visited, Louisa Caldwell, 32, a professor of comparative literature at UCL, admitted for oncology treatment. A deeper search revealed something that made her blood run cold. An old photo from 6 years ago showing Henry and Louisa together at a literary event. His gaze at the woman in the simple dress and long hair contained something Tiana had never seen directed at her. Pure and unmistakable love. "So that's it," she murmured to herself, slamming the laptop shut. An old mistress resurfaces. The past comes back to haunt him. Tiana poured herself a generous glass of wine, her mind calculating risks and possibilities. She hadn't gotten where she was by being passive or accepting threats to her carefully planned lifestyle. And she wouldn't start now. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Will continue. 2 days later, Louisa's transfer to St. Vincent's Clinic happened without incident. The new room was spacious, with a view of Kew Gardens, equipped with state-of-the-art medical technology and comforts that the public system could not offer. Henry had secured the best medical team available, led by Dr. Mark Vance, a renowned oncologist with international experience. "The case is challenging but not impossible," the doctor explained in a private meeting with Henry. "We will immediately begin a more aggressive treatment protocol. There is also the possibility of including her in a clinical study with experimental drugs that have shown promising results in similar cases." Henry nodded, absorbing the information with the same attention he would dedicate to a crucial financial report. "Cost is not an issue, Doctor. Do whatever is necessary." "Mr. Ashton," the doctor adjusted his glasses, "you must understand that even with the best resources, we are dealing with an advanced stage. We have hope, yes, but we also need to be realistic." "I understand," Henry replied, although a part of him refused to accept any scenario that did not include Louisa's complete recovery. "But let's focus on the treatment now." That same morning, he received the DNA test results by email. 99.9999% probability of paternity. It was no surprise, just scientific confirmation of something his heart already knew. Julia was his daughter. When he shared the news with Louisa, she just smiled, already lying in her new hospital bed. "I never had any doubts." "I need to resolve some legal issues," Henry explained. "Paternity recognition, alteration of the birth certificate to include my name, guarantees for Julia's future." "Always practical," Louisa commented without irony. "It's good to know that some things don't change." Henry carefully took her hand, noticing how fragile it seemed, with an intravenous medication needle fixed on the back. "A lot has changed, Louisa." "I've changed." She studied him for a moment. "Yes, I think so. Your eyes look different, less armored." The comment hit Henry deeply. Louisa had always had this ability to see beyond appearances, to perceive nuances that others ignored. It was one of the qualities that had attracted him from the beginning, years ago, when she was just a young guest lecturer for a talk at his company, speaking about English literature and cultural identity with a contagious passion. He spent the afternoon with Julia at the park near the clinic, watching her play with other children, while Louisa rested after the first procedures. The naturalness with which the girl had accepted him into her life constantly surprised him. There were no suspicions or resentments, just childish curiosity and genuine joy at his presence. "Why don't you live with us?" Julia asked as they walked back to the clinic, hand in hand through the well-tended gardens. The question, asked with the characteristic innocence of children, caught Henry off guard. "Well, it's complicated, Julia. Adults sometimes have different arrangements. But now you know you're my daddy," she insisted with impeccable logic. "And you like Mummy. I saw the way you look at her. It's just like the prince in the stories." Henry couldn't help but smile. "Things are a little more complicated than in stories, little one." Why? Julia pressed. If you like Mummy and you like me and we like you, why is it complicated? The question hung in the air unanswered as they entered the elevator. Henry realized he didn't have an explanation that made sense, neither for Julia nor for himself. Upon arriving at the room, they found Louisa sleeping peacefully. Constance, who remained a constant and protective presence, suggested taking Julia home as it was getting late. I can drive you, Henry offered, and also pick up some things Louisa might need to be more comfortable here. Constance hesitated, her initial skepticism towards Henry still present, though softened by the days of interaction. All right, but we need to stop by Louisa's apartment first to get clothes for Julia and some personal items. Louisa's apartment in Islington was small but cozy. Books occupied every available space, on shelves, piled on tables, even some on the floor near the reading armchair. Photographs of Julia's childhood decorated the walls, visually telling the story of the years Henry had missed. While Julia animatedly showed off her room and her favorite toys, Constance selected clothes and necessary items. Henry wandered through the apartment, absorbing details of the life Louisa and Julia had built without him. He noticed the bills organized in a folder on the kitchen table, some with stamps of second notice and overdue payment. Louisa was always too proud to ask for help, Constance commented, noticing his gaze. Even when the illness started to prevent her from teaching all her classes, she refused offers of financial aid from friends. Henry nodded, feeling a pang of guilt and admiration simultaneously. While he accumulated millions in his ventures, Louisa struggled to keep the bills paid and raise their daughter with dignity. On the way back, after dropping Constance and Julia at home, Henry was driving thoughtfully through the streets of London when his phone rang. It was Marianne, his assistant, with an urgent tone she rarely used. "Mr. Ashton, I'm sorry to bother you, but a situation has arisen that requires your immediate attention." "What happened, Marianne?" "Business and Power magazine is about to publish an article about you, something about, well, about a supposed secret daughter and a hospitalized woman." Henry felt his blood run cold. "How did they find out?" "I don't know, sir. Our contact at the editorial office discreetly alerted us. The article has a suggestive tone. It insinuates that the woman might be trying to extort you, taking advantage of your position." "That's absurd," Henry exploded, hitting the steering wheel. "I want a copy of that article before publication, and schedule a meeting with our legal team for first thing tomorrow morning." As he hung up, a suspicion began to form in his mind. Only a handful of people knew about the situation. Marianne, who was discretion personified, the doctor, protected by professional secrecy, Constance, completely loyal to Louisa, and Tiana, to whom he had vaguely mentioned a family matter without going into detail. Tiana, marketing director and expert in public image manipulation. Instead of returning to the hotel where he was staying, Henry drove directly to the Kensington apartment. He found Tiana in the living room working on her laptop, impeccably dressed as always, a glass of red wine beside her. "Henry!" she exclaimed with feigned surprise. "Finally decided to come home? I've been worried." "It was you, wasn't it?" he asked directly without mincing words. Tiana raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Me who? What are you talking about?" "The article in Business and Power. The insinuation that Louisa is trying to extort me." A faint smile touched Tiana's lips. "Ah, that. Well, someone needed to protect your interests since you seem to have lost the ability to do so." "My interests?" Henry repeated, incredulous. "Tiana, you have no idea what you're talking about. Louisa never asked for anything. She hid the pregnancy from me. She raised our daughter alone for 5 years, even when she was sick." "Our daughter?" Tiana laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You're already using that term. The DNA test probably isn't even ready yet." "It is, and it confirmed the obvious. Julia is my daughter." Tiana stood up, calmly walking to the bar to refill her glass. "Be that as it may, you need to consider the impact of all this on your public image, on the company, on the stock value. A scandal like this could be devastating." "There would be no scandal at all if you hadn't leaked the story," Henry argued, controlling his anger. "And what kind of scandal would that be?" "A man discovering he has a daughter and taking responsibility." "Don't be naive," Tiana retorted, her tone condescending. "The story that will be told depends on who tells it first. I merely ensured the narrative favored us." Henry watched her for a long moment, truly seeing her perhaps for the first time. The calculated beauty, the undisguised ambition, the coldness beneath the practiced smile. How could he have been with this woman for almost 2 years without realizing her true nature? "It was you who sent me that photo 6 years ago too, wasn't it?" he asked suddenly, the pieces clicking into place in his mind. "Louisa, with her brother. You worked in the press office of the literary event where we met." The slight widening of Tiana's eyes was confirmation enough. "Why?" Henry insisted. "Why do that?" "You were losing focus," she replied after a moment, dropping the pretenses. "You were in love with that plain little professor, talking about simplifying life, about finding purpose beyond work. That would have destroyed everything you had been building. I just adjusted your path back on track." Henry felt a wave of nausea as he realized the implications. "You manipulated my life. You separated me from the woman I loved. You deprived me of knowing my daughter for 5 years. And I built your career with you," Tiana completed without remorse. "I turned you into the powerful man you are today. You should thank me." "Get out of my apartment," Henry said, his voice dangerously low. "Pardon? You heard me. Get out. Now. And tomorrow I want your resignation letter on my desk. If you ever try to harm Louisa or Julia again, I will use every penny I have and every connection I possess to ensure you never work in this city again." Tiana paled, finally realizing the seriousness of the situation. "You can't do that. We have a contract. We had a convenient arrangement, not a real relationship," Henry interrupted. "And as for the company contract, I suggest you review the clauses on professional ethics and conflict of interest. Attempting to tarnish the CEO's reputation with false information certainly falls under just cause for dismissal." Tiana grabbed her laptop and purse, moving to the bedroom, likely to gather some essential belongings. Before leaving the living room, however, she turned with an icy glare. "You'll regret this, Henry. When the dust settles and the novelty wears off, you'll realize you threw away everything we built for a fantasy of a perfect family with a woman who won't last until next Christmas." The cruel comment provoked a reaction Tiana certainly didn't expect. Henry laughed, a genuine, almost liberating laugh. "Do you know the difference between you and Louisa, Tiana? She never needed to diminish others to feel important, and that's why even when sick, she has something that you, with all your beauty and status, will never have. People who truly love her." Alone in the apartment after Tiana's stormy departure, Henry sat on the sofa with his head in his hands. The situation with the magazine needed to be controlled, but his greatest concern was how all this would affect Louisa and Julia. The last thing Louisa needed now was additional stress. His phone rang again. It was Marianne, informing him that she had obtained a preliminary copy of the article. She would send it by email immediately. She also communicated that all members of the legal team would be available for the meeting the following morning, as requested. Opening the email on his laptop, Henry felt his anger grow. The article was worse than he had imagined, with malicious insinuations about opportunism and dubious paternity, citing sources close to the businessman. There was even a recent photograph of Louisa being transferred to the clinic, taken from a distance, completely violating her privacy. His first reaction was to summon every lawyer in the office and sue the magazine into bankruptcy. But then he remembered something Louisa used to say back when they were together. Sometimes the best answer isn't to fight the darkness, but to light a candle. An idea began to form in his mind. Instead of trying to suppress the story or threaten the magazine with lawsuits, why not tell his own version of the facts? Take control of the narrative, not in the calculated, manipulative way Tiana had suggested, but with honesty and transparency. He picked up the phone and dialed the number of Charles Miller, editor-in-chief of the Financial Times, with whom he had maintained a respectful relationship for years. "Charles, it's Henry Ashton. I know it's late, but I have a proposal for you. An exclusive interview tomorrow. Yes, about the rumors that are circulating. No advisors or pre-approved questions. Just you, me, and the complete truth." As he hung up, Henry felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in many years, perhaps since he lost Louisa, he was acting with his heart, not just his head, and curiously, instead of feeling vulnerable or exposed, he felt stronger than ever. Looking out the window at the lights of Kensington, he made a decision. After the interview tomorrow, he would put the apartment up for sale. This place had never been a real home, just a status symbol, a backdrop to impress others. And now, with Julia in his life and the hope of a future with Louisa, he realized he wanted something different. A place with books piled on tables, children's drawings on the walls, and the comfortable clutter of real life. A home. The interview with Charles Miller for the Financial Times took place the next morning at the cafe of the Fasano Hotel near Henry's apartment. He deliberately chose a public location, wanting to show that he had nothing to hide. He dressed as always, impeccable suit, white shirt, Italian shoes, but there was something different in his posture, an authenticity that Charles, who had known him for years, immediately noticed. "You look well, Henry," the journalist commented after the initial greetings. "Different somehow." "I am different," Henry confirmed, accepting the coffee the waiter served. "I recently discovered I have a 5-year-old daughter." Charles raised his eyebrows, appreciating the unusual frankness. He turned on his recorder with a nod of permission. "That explains the rumors that have started circulating. Do you want to tell me how it happened?" Over the next hour, Henry recounted the entire story, the relationship with Louisa 6 years prior, the separation caused by a misunderstanding, the recent discovery of his daughter and Louisa's illness. He spoke with an honesty that surprised even himself, without hiding his own flaws or trying to polish the narrative. "I lost almost 6 years of my daughter's life due to pride and not seeking the truth," he admitted. "It's time I'll never get back. But now I have the chance to be a father, to be present for her and for Louisa during this difficult time." "And what about the insinuations that Louisa Caldwell might be trying to gain financial advantage through this situation?" Charles asked, referring directly to the article that would be published by the rival magazine. Henry smiled without humor. "Louisa never asked for anything. She didn't even seek me out. It was Julia, our daughter, who took the initiative to hand me a letter, fulfilling her mother's request. If Louisa wanted money, she could have come to me years ago, when she discovered the pregnancy. Instead, she raised our daughter alone, with dignity and love even when she fell ill." "How do you feel about these accusations?" Henry took a sip of coffee, pondering his answer. "Initially, I was furious. My instinct was to sue, threaten, use my economic power to silence these voices, but then I realized that would just be another way of hiding the truth. I'm tired of walls, Charles. That's why I'm here, speaking openly. I have nothing to hide." The interview took paths that even Charles hadn't foreseen. Henry spoke about his own insecurities as a first-time father, about the admiration he felt for Louisa's strength, about the hope for medical treatment. He spoke of Julia's intelligence and curiosity, of how she had won his heart in a matter of hours. When the conversation ended, Charles turned off the recorder, genuinely touched. "You know, Henry, I've covered your career for years. I've seen you build an empire, overcome economic crises, close impossible deals. But I don't think I've ever seen you as human as you are today." Henry extended his hand, shaking the journalist's. "I hope your article helps establish the truth. Not for me, but for Louisa and Julia. They don't deserve to be targets of malicious speculation." "It will be published tomorrow on the front page," Charles assured him. "And Henry, good luck to all of you." After the interview, Henry drove directly to St. Vincent's Clinic. Upon reaching Louisa's room, he found her sitting in the armchair by the window, reading a book to Julia, who was snuggled beside her. The scene was so natural, so perfect, that he hesitated at the door, not wanting to interrupt. "Daddy!" Julia exclaimed as she noticed him, sliding off her mother's lap and running to hug him. The term still caught him off guard, filling him with an emotion he had never experienced before. He knelt to hug his daughter, then lifted her into his arms. "What were you reading?" he asked, approaching Louisa, who watched him with a gentle smile. "The Little Prince," Julia replied, pointing to the illustrated book. "It's the part about the fox." "Fox," Louisa corrected gently, "and it's my favorite part too." "You become responsible forever for what you have tamed," Henry quoted, surprising both Louisa and himself with his memory. "You remember," Louisa commented, her eyes shining with something akin to admiration. "You gave me that book on our third date," he explained, sitting on the edge of the bed with Julia still in his arms. "You said it was essential to understand your worldview." A moment of comfortable silence hung between them, filled with shared memories and untrodden paths. It was Julia who broke it, with the typical objectivity of children. "Are you going to live together again now? Because I think it would be much easier for everyone." Louisa blushed, embarrassed. "Julia, we've talked about this. Adults have complicated relationships and—" "Actually," Henry interrupted, "it's not such an absurd idea." Both looked at him, surprised. "After you leave here, Louisa," he continued, choosing his words carefully, "you'll need a quiet place for your recovery. Your apartment is cozy, but the building doesn't have a lift, which would be difficult for you at first. And I put my apartment up for sale this morning." "You what?" Louisa asked, astonished. "It was never a real home," Henry explained. "Just a place to sleep between meetings and trips. I was thinking of looking for a house in Hampstead Heath or Richmond Park. Something with a garden for Julia to play in, space for your books, maybe an office where I can work from home more often." He realized he was rambling and stopped, suddenly vulnerable. "That is, if you accept. We don't need to decide anything now, of course. Just think about it." Louisa seemed speechless, a rarity for the eloquent literature professor. Julia, however, had no such reservations. "I want a yellow room," she declared with conviction, "and a swing in the garden. And can we have a dog?" Henry laughed, grateful for the childish intervention that eased the tension of the moment. "We'll see about the dog, but yellow and a swing sound like great ideas." Henry's phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Marianne. The legal team was waiting for him for the scheduled meeting about the magazine article. "I need to leave for a few hours," he explained, returning Julia to her mother's lap with a kiss on her forehead. "Company matters to resolve. I'll be back for dinner." At the door he hesitated and turned back to Louisa. "By the way, I gave an interview today, telling our story. It will be out tomorrow in the Financial Times. I hope you don't mind." Louisa seemed surprised but nodded. "I trust you, Henry." 4 simple words that meant the world to him. At Ashton Tech headquarters, the atmosphere was one of contained apprehension when Henry walked through the glass doors of the imposing building on Whitehall. Employees watched him with poorly disguised curiosity, some offering supportive smiles, others avoiding his gaze. The rumors were clearly already circulating through the corporate corridors. His top-floor office remained exactly as he had left it days ago, impeccably organized, minimalist, with a panoramic view of the Thames estuary. It seemed to belong to someone else now, to a Henry Ashton who no longer existed. The meeting with the legal team was brief and direct. Henry informed them that he had given an exclusive interview to the Financial Times, telling the whole truth about his newly discovered paternity. "But, sir," objected Richard Pierce, the chief lawyer, "this could have serious implications for the company's image. The shareholders need to understand that I am taking responsibility for my personal life," Henry interrupted firmly. "There are no financial scandals, no embezzlement of funds, nothing that directly affects Ashton Tech. Just a man discovering he is a father and acting as such." "And what about the Business and Power article?" asked another lawyer. "We can still try for an injunction to prevent publication." Henry shook his head. "No, let them publish it. When our version comes out tomorrow, theirs will look exactly like what it is, a petty attempt to create a scandal where none exists. And, by the way," he added, looking at each of them, "I want an internal investigation to discover the source of this leaked information. I have my suspicions, but I want evidence." After dismissing the lawyers, he called Marianne to the office. The assistant entered with her usual efficiency, although her gaze betrayed concern. "How is Miss Maxwell?" Henry asked directly. Marianne hesitated for only a second. "Ms. Maxwell submitted her resignation letter this morning. She requested that her belongings be sent to her parents' apartment and informed us that she will be unavailable for the next few weeks, as she will be traveling abroad." "I understand," Henry replied, not truly surprised. Tiana was intelligent enough to know when to retreat. "I want the HR department to process the resignation immediately, following the basic contractual terms. Nothing more, nothing less than she is entitled to." "Yes, sir. And what about your schedule? Should I still keep all appointments cancelled?" Henry reflected for a moment. "Reorganize the essentials. Meetings that can be conducted by video conference, preferably. I want to spend as much time as possible at the clinic with Louisa and Julia." Marianne nodded but remained standing, as if she wanted to say something more. "Yes, Marianne. Sir, I just wanted to say that I'm happy for you. About meeting your daughter, I mean. Everyone here who truly cares about you is rooting for everything to work out." The unexpected and sincere comment caught Henry off guard. In 6 years of working together, it was probably the first time Marianne had expressed something so personal. "Thank you, Marianne. That means a lot." The assistant nodded and withdrew, leaving Henry alone with his thoughts. Walking to the window, he contemplated the city stretching below, with its contrasts of wealth and poverty, golden beaches and hillside communities, glittering skyscrapers and historic buildings. He thought about how his view of London and of life had changed dramatically in just a few days. The same streets he once saw only as routes between meetings now seemed full of possibilities for Sunday strolls with Julia. The sky he had barely noticed before now seemed an invitation to fly kites, as he had done in his own childhood, before his father's expectations stifled such frivolities. His phone rang, displaying his father's number. He hesitated, but answered. "I see you've put the apartment up for sale," Augustus said without preamble, "and I heard about an interview for the Financial Times. Have you completely lost your mind, Henry?" "Hello to you too, father," he replied calmly. "And no, I haven't lost my mind. On the contrary, I think I've found it. It's that woman, isn't it? She's manipulating you, using the child to—" "That woman has a name, father, Louisa, and she has never manipulated anyone. In fact, she did the exact opposite. She kept her distance so as not to interfere with my life, even when it meant raising our daughter alone." A tense silence followed on the other end of the line. Finally, Augustus spoke, his voice more controlled. "You confirmed paternity then?" 99.99999%. But you'd only need to look at Julia for 5 minutes to know the truth. She has my eyes, my chin, even the same way of frowning when she's concentrating." Another silence, longer this time. "Father," Henry continued, "I know you care about the family assets, the company, our position, but Julia is an Ashton, whether you accept it or not. And Louisa—" He hesitated, organizing his thoughts. "Louisa is the woman I love, always was. And now I have a second chance with her, with both of them. I'm not going to waste it." "Love," Augustus repeated, the word sounding strange in his voice. "You sound like your mother." The mention of his mother, who had passed away more than a decade ago, caught Henry by surprise. Augustus rarely spoke of her. "She would have liked Louisa," Henry commented softly, "and she would have loved Julia." A tired sigh came from the other end of the line. "Bring them for Sunday lunch at the farm in the Cotswolds. I want to meet my granddaughter." The call ended before Henry could reply, leaving him astonished. Of all possible reactions, this was the one he least expected. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of emails, calls, and a video conference with German investors who, surprisingly, congratulated him on his recent paternity as if it were the most natural development in the world. At 6 o'clock, Henry left the office, promising himself that he would not let work dominate his life as before. On the way to the clinic, he stopped at a bookstore and bought several children's books, including a luxurious edition of The Little Prince with restored original illustrations. He also purchased the latest novel by the Mozambican writer Mia Couto, which he knew to be one of Louisa's favorites. Upon entering the hospital room, he found a scene that made his heart clench. Louisa sitting on the bed, very pale, while a nurse checked her vital signs. Julia was sitting in an armchair in the corner, drawing silently, with a worried expression that no 5-year-old should have. "What happened?" he asked, approaching quickly. "Just a reaction to the new medication," the nurse explained with reassuring professionalism. "It's common at the beginning of treatment. Dr. Vance has already adjusted the dosage." Louisa forced a weak smile. "I'm fine, Henry. Just a little tired." He took her hand, noticing how cold it was. "Are you sure? I can call another specialist. We can—" "Henry," Louisa interrupted softly, "trust the process. Dr. Vance knows what he's doing. It's just the body adjusting to the stronger medication." The nurse finished her checks and left discreetly, promising to return in an hour. Henry approached Julia, who looked up from her drawing, a colorful representation of what appeared to be a large house with a garden, 3 figures holding hands, and a dog. "It's our new house," she explained seriously. "Me, you, Mummy, and Spot." "Spot?" Henry asked, sitting beside her. "Our future dog. Julia replied, as if it were obvious. "He doesn't exist yet, but he will." Henry laughed, marveling at children's unwavering confidence in the future. He showed her the books he had brought, and Julia's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Together they sat beside Louisa's bed and began to read The Giraffe Who Ate Stars, a children's story about friendship and overcoming differences. The evening passed quietly. Henry read stories until Julia fell asleep on the small sofa bed in the room, covered with a soft blanket brought from home. Afterward he sat beside Louisa, sharing the day's news in a low voice. "My father wants to meet both of you," he commented, still surprised by the invitation. "He invited us for Sunday lunch at his farm in the Cotswolds." Louisa raised her eyebrows, clearly impressed. "The famous Augustus Ashton wants to meet me. I thought he was more the type to say, 'The Ashtons only mix with other traditional families.'" "He is," Henry confirmed, "which makes this even more surprising. I think the idea of a granddaughter awakened something in him." "Well, when I'm a bit better, we can consider that visit," Louisa said, adjusting herself in bed with a slight groan of discomfort. "But honestly, I'm more excited about the idea of a house with a garden. I always dreamed of having a place where Julia could play outdoors. And you, having a place for your books, for writing. I know you always wanted to finish that novel you started." Louisa's eyes shone with surprise and emotion. "You remember that?" "I barely mentioned—" "I remember everything, Louisa," Henry confessed, leaning closer. "Every conversation, every dream we shared. That's why I could never truly move on after you. No one else understood me that way." Louisa reached out, touching his face softly. "We have a lot of lost time to make up for, don't we?" "We have all the time in the world," he replied, leaning in to kiss her for the first time in 6 years. Across the room, pretending to sleep, Julia watched the scene with a satisfied smile. In her childish mind, everything was falling into place exactly as it should, like in the storybooks her mother read to her, where, after difficulties and trials, love always found a way. 3 months passed since that night at the hospital. Henry's interview with the Financial Times had exactly the impact he expected, transforming a potential scandal into a heartwarming story of family reconnection that touched the hearts of the British public. The malicious article in Business and Power, published a day later, was widely criticized and eventually led to a formal apology from the magazine. Louisa's treatment at St. Vincent's Clinic progressed with ups and downs. There were days of despair when the side effects seemed unbearable, and moments of cautious hope when tests showed small improvements. Dr. Vance maintained prudent optimism, always reminding them that the path would be long and difficult, but not impossible. On a sunny Sunday in June, Henry drove his car, no longer the ostentatious Mercedes, but a more practical and spacious SUV, along the winding road that led to the newly acquired property in Richmond Park. Beside him in the passenger seat, Louisa looked out the window, a colourful scarf covering her still hairless head, a serene smile on her lips. In the back seat, Julia bounced with excitement, barely containing her impatience. "Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" "Almost, little one," Henry replied, looking in the rearview mirror with a smile. "About 5 more minutes." Louisa had been discharged from the hospital a week earlier, on the condition of continuing outpatient treatment and maintaining rest. The house in Richmond Park, surrounded by greenery and silence, seemed the perfect place for her recovery. Henry had bought it without Louisa knowing, as a surprise, spending weeks personally supervising the renovations to ensure everything was perfect for their arrival. "I hope you like it," he commented, holding Louisa's hand as he drove. "If it's not exactly what you imagined, we can make adjustments." "I'm sure it will be perfect," she replied, squeezing his hand back. "After all, you always had good taste. Except, perhaps, for that phase of purple ties." Henry laughed, remembering an old joke between them. That's how it was now. Fragments of the past naturally resurfaced in their conversations, without pain or regret, just as parts of a shared story that continued to unfold. When he finally parked in front of the house, he heard Julia's delighted exclamation and Louisa's emotional sigh. The property was a modern colonial-style construction, with wide verandas and large windows that allowed abundant natural light. Around it, an extensive garden with fruit trees, flower beds, and, as promised, a colourful swing hanging from the strong branch of a mango tree. The view of Richmond Park created the impression of being in a secluded refuge, although the property was only 20 minutes from central London. Come see, Julia exclaimed, quickly unbuckling her seatbelt and running out of the car as soon as Henry turned it off. He helped Louisa out, supporting her gently. She was still weak, but each day she seemed to regain a little more of her energy. Slowly, he murmured, kissing her forehead. We have all the time in the world. While Julia ran through the garden, exploring every corner with childish enthusiasm, Henry slowly led Louisa to the veranda. The front door was made of solid wood with wrought iron details, a handcrafted piece they had admired together years before in an art gallery. You remembered, Louisa commented, touching the intricate patterns of the door. I remember everything that matters, Henry replied simply. Upon entering, Louisa was speechless. The living room was spacious and welcoming, with dark wooden floors, comfortable sofas in earthy tones, and, most impressively, entire walls covered with bookshelves. You once said your dream was to have a house where books were part of the structure, not just decoration, Henry explained, observing her reaction. So I asked the architect to integrate the shelves into the walls. Louisa approached the shelves, running her fingers over the spines. These are my books, Constance helped me. We brought all of them from your apartment, plus some new ones I thought you'd like. Tears glistened in Louisa's eyes as she turned to him. It's perfect, Henry. More than I could ever dream of. Julia burst through the door at that moment, breathless with excitement. Mummy, there's a yellow room, and a treehouse, and a small pool. Can I see my room now? Please. Of course you can, Louisa laughed, discreetly wiping away a tear. Show the way, Daddy. The tour of the house revealed meticulous attention to detail and each person's preferences. Julia's room was in fact soft yellow, with a boat-shaped bed, another casually mentioned dream, and shelves full of books and educational toys. The master bedroom had a balcony with mountain views and a small adjoining library that would serve as Louisa's study. There was also a workspace for Henry, equipped with state-of-the-art technology that would allow him to manage the company remotely when necessary. A special room had been adapted for Louisa's treatment days, with a comfortable hospital bed, medical equipment discreetly integrated into the decor, and a television with streaming services for binge-watching during medication sessions. The kitchen was large and functional, with a big rustic wooden table for family meals, a contrast to the aseptic and practically unused kitchen of Henry's old Kensington apartment. I don't know how to cook, he admitted, opening cabinets that were already stocked with basic foods, but I want to learn, for you both. The last surprise awaited in the backyard behind a small white fence. A golden retriever puppy with golden fur slept peacefully in a cozy doghouse with the name Spot painted above the entrance. Julia's shouts of joy were probably heard throughout the neighborhood. You remembered Spot. A promise is a promise, Henry replied, bending down to pet the puppy who was waking up, confused by the commotion. He's 2 months old. The vet said he's very docile, perfect for children. As Julia got acquainted with her new friend, Louisa leaned on Henry's shoulder, watching the scene with evident emotion. How did you manage to do all this in just 3 months? She asked, marveling. Running the company, taking care of us at the hospital, supervising the purchase and renovation of this house. I have good contacts, he replied with a smile, and motivation. Besides, I found that when you really want something, you find time to make it happen. And what do you really want, Henry Ashton? Louisa asked, turning to face him. He gently held her face between his hands. This, you, us, a real family. That night, after Julia finally fell asleep, not without first making Henry read 3 stories and check 5 times if Spot was comfortable in his new dog bed in her room, the couple sat on the veranda, contemplating the city lights twinkling in the distance. How are you feeling? Henry asked, pouring chamomile tea for both of them. Tired, but in a good way, Louisa replied, wrapped in a light shawl. As if I'm finally home. They remained in silence for a few moments, just enjoying each other's presence and the tranquility of the night. It was a luxury they had both learned to value in recent months, moments of quiet, without the constant urgency of the next appointment or worry. I received an interesting proposal today, Henry commented casually, from the university. Seriously? Louisa straightened up, curious. What kind of proposal? They want me to give some lectures on social entrepreneurship, Apparently, our story generated an interesting debate about corporate responsibility and family values in the business world. Louisa smiled. Professor Ashton, it has a certain charm. Just a few lectures to start, he clarified. But I confess the idea appeals to me, to share experiences, to inspire young entrepreneurs to build businesses with purpose beyond profit. You'd be great at it, Louisa affirmed sincerely. You always had the gift of communication, and now you have a perspective that few executives possess. What changed in me, Louisa? Sometimes I don't even recognize myself anymore. In a good way. She considered the question for a moment. I think you just tore down the walls, Henry. You stopped being just the brilliant executive and allowed yourself to be human, with flaws, fears, love, everything you tried to hide before. And you? How are you coping with all these changes? Honestly? Louisa took a sip of tea. I'm still processing. 3 months ago, I was preparing Julia for a future without me, gathering courage to finally tell you about her. Now I'm in a dream home with you back in our lives, and doctors talking about real possibilities of complete remission. It feels like a dream I'm afraid to wake up from. Henry took her hand. It's not a dream. And I'm not going anywhere this time. I promise. After a moment of comfortable silence, Louisa asked, How was lunch with your father? You never told me all the details. Henry laughed, recalling the tense but surprisingly positive event that had occurred weeks earlier. It was interesting. My father tried to impress Julia with all the pomp of the farm, horses, formal gardens, the family silver that's been passed down for generations, and she simply asked why he had such thick eyebrows and if he could wiggle his ears like she could. Louisa stifled a laugh. Oh dear, and how did he react? I thought he'd be horrified, but surprisingly, he tried to wiggle his ears. Failed miserably, of course, but it was the first time in decades I'd seen him try something without being sure of success. And what about me? What did he think of the commoner who seduced Prince Ashton? Louisa asked, half joking, half serious. He was impressed by your knowledge of classical English literature. Apparently Charles Dickens is his favorite author, something I didn't even know. You two talked for almost an hour about great expectations while I entertained Julia. Your father is a complex man, Louisa observed. Very much like you, actually. Please don't say that, Henry groaned dramatically, making her laugh. It's a compliment, silly. You both have layers beyond the public persona. It's just that you chose to tear down your walls, while he still lives behind his. The conversation continued, flowing naturally between light and profound topics, plans for the future and reflections on the past. At some point, Henry realized that Louisa had fallen asleep gently in her chair, her face relaxed and peaceful. With infinite care, he picked her up in his arms, noticing with concern and hope that she seemed heavier than weeks before, a good sign of recovery, and carried her to the bedroom. After settling her in bed, he sat beside her for a moment, simply watching her breathe, marveling at the miracle of having her back in his life. The next morning, Henry woke to the sound of laughter coming from the garden. Looking out the window, he saw Louisa sitting in a comfortable chair under the mango tree, watching Julia trying to teach basic commands to the clumsy puppy, Spot. He quickly dressed and went to prepare breakfast, a new skill he had been developing with determination, though still far from perfection. Toast only lightly burnt, strong coffee as Louisa liked it, freshly squeezed orange juice for Julia. As he brought the tray to the garden, he was greeted by radiant smiles from his two favorite women and enthusiastic barks from Spot. "Good morning, family," he said, placing the tray on the garden table. "Family," Louisa repeated, the word sounding like a blessing on her lips. "Do you know what we were just talking about?" "What?" Henry asked, pouring juice for Julia, who immediately began recounting her morning adventures with her new furry friend. "About names," Louisa replied when her daughter's animated narrative paused. "Names? For the baby," Julia completed, as if it were obvious, pointing to Louisa's still flat belly. "Mummy said he'll take a long time to arrive, but we need to start thinking about cool names." Henry froze, the juice pitcher still in the air. "Baby?" he repeated, looking at Louisa with wide eyes. She bit her lip, both nervous and radiant. "Dr. Vance confirmed yesterday during my routine checkup. He was surprised, said it's extremely rare during treatment, but that all signs are positive, both for remission and for our future family member. I wanted to wait for the right moment to tell you." "And it's now," Julia declared, clapping her hands. "Surprise!" Henry carefully placed the pitcher on the table, approached Louisa, and knelt beside her, speechless. He placed his hand on her belly with reverence, as if he could feel the slightest spark of life that had just been announced. "A baby," he whispered finally, his voice choked with emotion. "Our baby." "If all goes well," Louisa added, cautious but hopeful. "The doctor said it will be a delicate journey with constant monitoring, but there's no reason not to go ahead if we want to." "If we want to?" Henry repeated, almost laughing through the tears that now freely flowed down his face. "Louisa, it's everything I could wish for. A new chance, a new life, literally." Julia approached, hugging them both. "And I'm going to be the best big sister in the world." At that moment, under the blossoming mango tree, with the morning sun filtering through the leaves and creating golden patterns over them, Henry Ashton, the man who once believed that walls were necessary to survive, fully understood the meaning of being exposed, vulnerable, and completely alive, and he wouldn't trade that feeling for anything in the world. A year later, the house in Richmond Park was decorated for a special celebration. Colourful balloons danced in the gentle breeze, tables in the garden boasted white tablecloths and wildflower arrangements, and a handmade banner hung between two trees announced, "Welcome, Gabriel." The new member of the Ashton Caldwell family, just 2 weeks old, slept peacefully in his mother's arms, oblivious to the activity around him. Louisa, with her brown hair already grown to her shoulders and a healthy glow on her face, smiled at the guests who approached to meet the little one. Julia, now 6 years old, proudly moved among the guests like a little hostess, introducing her brother with an air of importance, closely followed by Spot, now a good-sized dog, but who maintained the clumsy and affectionate behavior of a puppy. Henry watched the scene from the porch, talking with Dr. Vance, whose normally serious expression was relaxed in a satisfied smile. "The latest tests confirm what we already suspected," the doctor commented. "Complete remission. Of course, we will continue regular monitoring, but Louisa has won a battle that many would consider impossible." "Thank you, Doctor," Henry said, shaking the doctor's hand with sincere gratitude. "Not just for the medical treatment, but for believing when many would have given up." "The credit is hers," the doctor replied. "Louisa has extraordinary inner strength, and of course, an equally powerful motivation." He gestured, encompassing the family scene in the garden. At the party, Henry's and Louisa's worlds mingled harmoniously. University professors chatted animatedly with executives, the clinic's medical team socialized with Ashton tech programmers, old friends reconnected in happy circumstances. Even Augustus Ashton, now a surprisingly dedicated grandfather, was present, talking with Constance about traditional English recipes. In a moment of relative tranquility, Henry approached Louisa and sat beside her on the bench under the mango tree, the same place where, a year earlier, they had received the news of the pregnancy. "Happy?" he asked, putting his arm around her shoulders and admiring their son, who slept with the serenity of the innocent. "Complete," she replied, leaning against him. "It's as if all the pain, all the misunderstandings, all the difficulties were necessary for us to arrive exactly at this moment." "Do you know what else impresses me?" Henry reflected. "How it all started with a simple letter and a brave little girl in a yellow dress. The universe has interesting ways of bringing together people who are meant to be together," Louisa philosophized. "Sometimes it just needs a little push from destiny." They looked together at Julia, who was now showing a group of children how Spot could sit and give a paw at the same time, a feat she considered extraordinary. "I think we owe everything to her," Henry commented. "Our little messenger of destiny." "Actually," Louisa corrected with a mysterious smile, "we owe it to my former student, Teresa, who worked at your building's reception. It was she who convinced Mrs. Zelda to let Julia come up against all protocols." "What?" Henry turned to face her, surprised. "You planned this?" "Not exactly," Louisa laughed. "I sent Julia with Constance, hoping she could deliver the letter at reception. I didn't imagine she would manage to reach you personally. It was Teresa, recognizing Julia from photos I showed at the university, who orchestrated the accidental encounter." "You're telling me our epic love story began with a conspiracy of receptionists? And desperate university professors?" Louisa completed with a wink. "Teresa is over there, by the way, the girl in the blue dress, talking to your IT assistant." Henry looked in the indicated direction, identifying a young woman he had never noticed before, although she had apparently been instrumental in completely changing the course of his life. "I'll send her the biggest flower arrangement London has ever seen," he declared, making Louisa laugh. "Or we could simply invite her to be Gabriel's godmother," Louisa suggested. "It seems more appropriate." "Godmother it shall be," Henry agreed, leaning in to kiss her softly. After all, without her, perhaps we would still be separated by misunderstandings and invisible walls. Gabriel chose that moment to wake up, opening eyes that already showed the same grey-green hue as his father's. Small hands fluttered in the air, as if trying to participate in the conversation. "He agrees," Louisa laughed, adjusting the baby in her arms. Henry touched his son's tiny hand, marveling as the minuscule fingers closed firmly around his index finger. It was a simple, instinctive gesture, but for him it symbolized everything that truly mattered: connection, trust, unconditional love. In that perfect instant, with his newborn son in his arms, his daughter playing happily in the garden, and the woman he loved by his side, Henry Ashton, once known as the ICE executive, fully understood a truth that many take a lifetime to discover. The true walls are not those we build around us, but those we erect within ourselves. And true power lies not in absolute control, but in the courage to let oneself love and be loved, with all the vulnerabilities that entails. Little Gabriel yawned dramatically, prompting smiles from his parents. Above them, the mango tree swayed gently in the breeze, its leaves whispering secrets that only time would reveal. And in the distance, London stretched out in its eternal splendor, reminding them that life, like the wonderful city, is made of contrasts, challenges, and most importantly, unexpected beauties that emerge when we least expect them. Dear listeners, we hope Henry, Louisa, and Julia's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it here by clicking to the left of the screen. If you enjoyed this story of love and new beginnings, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the transformative power of love. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to reading your comments.